Hello, I'm Kelda Yoon. A show of support today for the students, parents, and faculty at a Jewish girls' school in North York. This after shots were fired at the building over the weekend. Police tonight still looking for multiple suspects as numerous community leaders and elected officials denounced the incident as an act of hate. Dale Manukduk has this story.
We will go to class, pray to God Almighty, and learn. Have a great day.
Student spirits were high at Beis Hayamushka. Before class began, about 150 people gathered to show their support for the school and Jewish communities.
What happened here this weekend crossed a dangerous line. It was an attempt to intimidate and to isolate the wonderful people, the wonderful children here at Beis Hayamushka. And it was a deliberate attempt to spread fear across our entire Jewish community, to make us cower and hide who we are. But as you can see here today, the attackers completely failed. We are more united than ever.
Police say on Saturday around 5 a.m., suspects opened fire on the empty school, causing damage to the front of the building. A copy of the security video posted to X by Israeli Consul General in Toronto, Idit Shamir, shows two individuals standing outside the gates of the school before opening fire and then running to a getaway vehicle.
Inside, thank God, we have no damage. We have window damage, window frame, a little stucco damage, but nothing crazy.
The school's principal says he was going to have honest conversations about the incident with the entire student body, tough conversations that some have already been having at home.
I told them the truth. That's how I approach everything. But their reaction surprised me more than anything. They said, Hashem's taking care of us, and we have a community standing behind us, so we're standing strong.
There were no reports of any injuries. Over the weekend, police would not call Saturday's incident a hate crime or terrorist act. But many elected officials who joined the support rally said otherwise, calling it a clear anti-Semitic act.
And we say to this coward, these cowards, we will find you. You will be held responsible.
According to Canada's Public Safety Minister, Toronto Police will have help from the RCMP.
They're very much engaged with the Toronto Police Service, and I hope very much that the community in Toronto understands that we're bringing every law enforcement tool to bear.
A police presence remained at the school, and cops say they've also increased patrols around other Jewish institutions. The Gangs and Guns Task Force is leading the investigation with support from the Hate Crimes Unit. Dale Manukduk, CBC News, Toronto.
A deadline set by the University of Toronto for students to dismantle a pro-Palestinian encampment has now come and gone. But the protesters, along with the barricades and the tents, are still there. Well, now the school is filing an injunction order with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice to bring the encampment to an end. Tyler Cheese has the latest.
The deadline given to students as part of a trespass order issued by the university last week passed at 8 a.m. this morning. But just as the deadline passed this morning, a huge group of people came out to show their support for the students. At a rally that followed, several speakers offered their support, including those representing labor unions.
When we heard on Friday that the senior administration of the University of Toronto had issued an ultimatum, we recognized it for what it was: an attempt to threaten and to bully you, to force you to back down in the same way that employers and governments do to workers at the bargaining table and on the picket lines. We saw it as an attempt to sidestep good faith negotiations and to wield institutional power to avoid accountability. And we completely reject that.
We, Jews, have a long tradition of opposing racism. Yet occupation, the systematic war of destruction, is done in our name. That is an unforgivable crime against the Jewish people. It is also a violent assault against the solidarity between Palestinians, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and the many others who desire love, equality, and peace on earth.
U of T posted an update on its website this morning saying its lawyers have now served the required documents to the Superior Court. It's also asked for the case to be expedited. So now it'll be on the lawyers to demonstrate there's an ongoing safety or security risk at the encampment in order to convince the court to issue the order. This follows a similar strategy that other universities have tried. Earlier this month, an injunction request from McGill University in Montreal was rejected by Quebec Superior Court. But lawyers for the school have requested that case be revisited in July. Also, just today, the University of Quebec in Montreal was granted a partial injunction. In that case, the court has ruled protesters can't set up tents within 2 meters of campus buildings. Now, representatives for the U of T encampment say they do have legal support that will help them fight the injunction at court. Tyler Cheese, CBC News, Toronto.
Doug Ford and his Minister of Colleges and Universities, Jill Dunlop, have repeatedly called for the encampment to be removed. Dunlop was asked about the ongoing standoff at U of T earlier today, citing her concerns over safety.
We've heard updates from the fire departments at several locations about the actions that are being taken, concern about young children coming into the encampments in the evening, propane heaters. So there's a lot of safety issues happening here.
How do you balance all of this, though, with their right to protest?
Well, of course, free speech is important, but the schools were very clear from the beginning that encampments were considered trespassing and they would be dealt with accordingly. We haven't seen that, and that's why we continue to have daily updates from our presidents. I've reached out to the presidents myself, but the Premier and I have been supportive of ending encampments and have been very clear on that.
Now, as mentioned, in Montreal, a Superior Court judge has partially granted an injunction request by the Université du Québec à Montréal. It will prohibit pro-Palestinian protesters from setting up tents within 2 meters of campus buildings. Kwabina Udoro has the details.
In the decision by the judge, the partial injunction request says that the protesters need to stop blocking doors, windows, and let UQAM's fire department have access into the buildings. The camp needs to be 2 meters away from the accesses so people can access the buildings in and out freely. I want to show you what the encampment looks like right now. This is what it looks like at all the entrances around this part of the UQAM campus. People are having trouble getting in and out of the buildings. And this encampment started really as a protest to the injunction request filed by McGill against the McGill encampment. At that time, people at this encampment were saying that they would invite people from the McGill encampment to be here if the other encampment got dismantled. So people here at this encampment are calling for more measures than the other encampments. They want all universities in Quebec to cut ties with Israel. They want the province to abolish that bureau that they have in Tel Aviv as well. UQAM says that they don't have any ties with Israel, no firearms, no frameworks with Israel, and they say that they won't be reacting to the judgment just yet. They want to study it and see how it goes. And protesters here say that they're in it for the long haul. It's in solidarity with all the encampments across the country and all the other encampments that have still stayed standing up until this time across the world, and they say that they won't leave until their demands are met. And police presence is here at all the entrances at the UQAM campus. Police say that they are not going to step in because they don't have authority to. They said that campus security could give tickets, but they are not allowed to do anything because that is not the injunction request, and they are just here to monitor the situation and make sure that everything remains safe and peaceful. Kwabina Udoro, CBC News, Montreal.
Where 3 men are on trial for a fatal shooting that saw a gunman open fire on a family at a Mississauga restaurant. The incident in May 2021 left 1 person dead and 4 others seriously injured. The Crown is arguing the attack was planned by the men to stop the victim from reporting them to the police for their alleged ties to ISIS. Olivia Bowden has more.
Crown prosecutors used witness testimony from the victim's teenage sister along with phone records to bolster their case. They're sticking with their messaging and saying that the 3 men on trial have ties to the Islamic State and that they allegedly killed a 25-year-old man and targeted his entire family in order to silence him. The incident occurred on May 29, 2021. A man entered Chicken Land, a small restaurant on Glen Erin Drive and the College Way in Mississauga, and opened fire on the family that runs the eatery. The owner's son, Naim Akal, was killed. Akal's mother, father, brother, and a family friend were injured. His sister, Sandra, who was 13 at the time, was shot at but not injured. Prosecutors called her to the stand today. Sandra, who is now 16, appeared over Zoom and described the terror of watching her family be shot. She was doing homework in the back of the restaurant when the gunmen entered. She hid behind a fridge and described seeing her brother and father's bodies on the ground and blood on the floor. Sandra recalls only seeing the gunmen's eyes. The prosecution says that Anand Nath is the shooter, and he is charged with first-degree murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. They allege that Suleiman Raza drove Nath to the restaurant and was part of the plan to kill everyone in the restaurant. The third man, Nakash Abbasi, has been handed down the same charges. As the prosecution says, he actively encouraged Nath and Raza to commit the crimes. Akul had converted to Islam without his parents knowing. He had joined Abbasi's business that shipped Amazon products. But the business wasn't just about buying and selling products. The prosecution alleges that Abbasi used it to recruit followers to support ISIS. Akul planned to report the activities to police. Evidence presented by the Crown today also include records of Raza's cell phone where he had saved ISIS propaganda. Upcoming next in the trial this week include more witness testimony, including the victim's girlfriend. Olivia Bowden, CBC News, Brampton.
Toronto police are investigating after a teen boy was shot and killed overnight in Scarborough. It happened inside a residence with the suspect fleeing the scene. Brittany Billette has the latest.
16-year-old Jamal Abdinazir lived on Cataraqui Crescent, just off of Warden Avenue. He was shot in this residence behind me in the early hours of Monday morning. In a news release, police say they got the call around 1 a.m. Abdinazir later died in hospital. Kimberly Rampanen lives in the area and says she couldn't believe the news.
I'm shocked. Wow. I've lived here for 6 years. I haven't had any issues myself personally. I think it's a very quiet, well-kept neighborhood. And I'm so sorry. My condolences to his family. I'm shocked.
Earlier today, I spoke to a man who said his wife is a family member of Jamal's. He didn't want to speak on camera because he feared for his safety, like many residents in the neighborhood. He told me that Jamal was a respectful young man who stayed out of trouble, and that was echoed by other people I spoke to who knew him. CBC Toronto also spoke to local councillor Parthy Kandaval. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We know which neighborhoods are experiencing youth and gun violence, and there needs to be targeted investments that create opportunity.
Police say they're still looking for a suspect and they're reviewing video evidence, but in the meantime, they're encouraging anyone that has any information to call Crime Stoppers. Brittany Billette, CBC News, Toronto.
Peel police say they've arrested 16 people and laid hundreds of charges in connection with a months-long auto theft investigation.
As the investigation continued, investigators identified a local truck company that was facilitating the shipping of motor vehicles. A local company and trucking yard were identified within the region of Peel, and a family was identified who was responsible for facilitating and loading the transportation of motor vehicles. These individuals were facilitating the shipment of stolen vehicles through local intermodal hubs within the Greater Toronto Area and traveling the 401 corridor to the Port of Montreal. The vehicles were intended to be exported to the ports in the United Arab Emirates and the Port of Oman.
The investigation began back in October 2023. Police say 369 stolen vehicles valued at a total of $33 million have been recovered. The accused range in age from 17 to 57 years old. Police say arrest warrants have been issued for 10 additional suspects. Well, some city councillors representing suburban parts of Toronto are pushing for a rethink of new parking rules aimed at discouraging driving. They say rules around visitor parking at residential buildings don't make sense for their communities as they might for the downtown. Sarah McMillan explains.
This gas station near Bayview and Shepherd is set to be replaced by a high-rise condo building. With 44 stories and more than 500 units, it will add to the local housing supply. But what worries local city councillor Lily Cheng is the plan for parking, with just 7 visitor parking spots included in the application submitted to and approved by City Council.
Does that mean no one is allowed to have friends visiting? So it really doesn't seem like a sustainable plan. plan for the community.
Cheng says she was able to negotiate with the developer to increase the visitor parking to 14 spots, though she worries that still won't be enough. A little over 2 years ago, the city made changes to parking requirements for new developments throughout the city, part of an effort to encourage less reliance on cars, a move welcomed by those in the construction industry. Richard Lyle says it can cost $100,000 or more to build a single underground parking spot.
Our cost of housing now is a critical problem, and this is one of the things that we're working on trying to reduce, is how much it costs to bring a unit of housing to the market.
The new rules did away with minimum parking requirements for most new developments. Residential buildings do still need to include some visitor parking, but the minimums are now much lower. It varies based on how close the building is to transit, but it could mean as few as 5 visitor spots for a 300-unit building. That's compared with 30 under the previous rules.
I know it's not enough visitor parking. I know that for sure.
Some councillors representing the inner burbs say realities are different in their wards than downtown.
Someone living without a car has visitors with cars. We don't have overnight parking. We have a 3-hour limit, no parking on the avenues. So it's a real challenge in the suburbs when you intensify around the subway station, but it's still very suburban.
Last week, City Council referred a motion from Councillor Cheng to the Planning and Housing Committee. It asks city staff to consider different visitor parking requirements for suburban areas as part of a review already underway looking at overall parking requirements. Sarah McMillan, CBC News, Toronto.
Speculation is growing at Queen's Park that the province could be in for an election next year. Now, Ontario has fixed election dates. The next one is scheduled for 2026. But the Premier hasn't ruled out the possibility of asking for an election a year early. And opposition parties say they're ready for it. Lorena Redekop has more.
The opposition parties insisted they're ready should an election be called.
Bring it on. Bring it on. You know what? Whether it's tomorrow or 2 years from now, we're going to be ready.
Marit Stiles says the NDP already has an election planning committee in place. The Premier fueled the rumors already circulating about a potential early election by not directly answering if he'd stick to the June 2026 election date.
We're going to make sure that we fulfill our agenda.
He said that while fulfilling one piece of his agenda, announcing an earlier date than planned for allowing the sale of booze in convenience stores. As for why Doug Ford may want to head back to the polls early, all 3 opposition parties point to the Greenbelt scandal, with the RCMP investigation still underway. An early election meaning less chance it will be finished.
I think it would be very disrespectful to the taxpayer. They have a majority government. I can't envision a reason why they would want to call an early election.
I would call on the Premier to not be focused on politics right now and to actually be focused on the real problems people are facing.
Mark it on your calendar.
Ontario has fixed election dates, set to happen every 4 years, added under former Liberal Premier Dalton McGuinty in 2004, fulfilling a campaign promise.
Never again, Speaker, will the Premier have the ability to set election dates when it is politically opportune for the government.
But one political scientist says a Premier can still trigger an early election simply by visiting the Lieutenant Governor.
The Premier can call an election at any time or ask that an election be called at any time. So you don't actually need to change the law.
However, he thinks the possibility of Ford going out on the campaign trail a year early is unlikely and says this could be a distraction technique.
When a rumor like this comes out, it's something to talk about. You know, after a budget that really didn't do very much, and most of the spring session is usually about debating, what was in the budget.
He says there is a risk of upsetting voters by heading to the polls early, but that most people forget about that well before Election Day, and it doesn't affect their vote. Lorena Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
All right, let's go to Colette now with a check on your forecast. And Colette, some final May showers as we ease into June.
Yeah, and as we're getting through this month of May, it is usually, well, on average, the most prolific month stateside for tornadic activity. But this year has been especially strong. 58 more tornadoes over the weekend, and we look on average in the month of May where you tend to see these, and sure, we're getting them along that tornado alley. Texas hit especially hard in Oklahoma, but also across Arkansas and into Kentucky. And it'd be nice to think we're getting out of this as we reach the end of May, but even June can be a very busy month. And what you see happens here is that those tornadoes tend to stretch a little further north into North and South Dakota, for example, and even, of course, up into the southern prairie provinces in Canada. So there's still active weather to go, certainly stateside in terms of the timing. And then June 1st, hurricane season also begins. So that's really concerning for a state like Texas. Record-setting numbers of storm reports, too, just from yesterday. So that can include the tornadoes, but also wind damage and as well hail. So there were over 630 reports from Sunday alone. Active weather a little closer to home in our neck of the woods. Still a tornado watch, so conditions favorable. Could get some spin in here. It's getting less and less likely as we get a little bit later into the day, but that tornado watch still does include our nation's capital. And then we've been seeing some of these cells north of the city here, kind of this one that's just passed through Aurora and Newmarket and continues on towards the Kawartha Lakes as it keeps tracking kind of east to northeast. So that gives us this break, and we've certainly been seeing it and enjoying it for the last several hours here closer to the lake after receiving about 35 millimeters of rain earlier. But there's still this wraparound that has to make its way through, and then another system behind that. Then we get into a big pattern change. So our current temperatures, we are at 23 degrees. We do have some humidity. It feels like we're around 26. I know that's not oppressive, but a little bit of humidity in there. There's the wraparound plus this next system to come in. So an isolated thunderstorm not out of the question tonight. More likely that we get some rain showers, and we see some of those scattered through the day tomorrow. But then once we get to Wednesday, we really get into that pattern change and that improvement, and it goes on from there. Your lows 14 to 16 tonight, 19 tomorrow. And Kelda, look how good it gets once we get to midweek and beyond.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Colette.
You're welcome.
Welcome back. Israel says it will be investigating its overnight airstrike in Rafah. The Hamas-run health ministry said the attack killed 45 Palestinians who were sheltering in the area. It came hours after Hamas launched a barrage of rockets at Tel Aviv for the first time in months. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the deaths as a tragic mistake. Still, the airstrike is sparking global outrage. The attack happened less than 3 days after the UN World Court ordered Israel to abandon its offensive in Rafah. Sarah Coates has the latest.
The international reaction is continuing to pour in the wake of Sunday night's attack on an area in Rafah where many Palestinian refugees were sheltering. Now, residents in that area are describing terror, while paramedics have told AFP that people were simply ripped to pieces. We now have reaction from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He says that this is a tragic error, while the IDF spokesperson has come out to say that the military did not expect the strike to harm civilians, saying that before the attack, many steps were taken to reduce the chances of harm to uninvolved people, including a visual aerial inspection, the use of precision weaponry and intelligence information, adding that the IDF's top-tier fact-finding mechanism will investigate. We've heard from the UN Refugee Agency, UNRWA, for Palestinian refugees, saying that a number of its employees remain missing, saying that nowhere in Gaza is safe, no person in Gaza is safe, describing the area as hell.
What we have seen in the immediate hours is that Israel continues the military action that has been asked to stop. Also, Hamas is launching rockets against Israel, so both sides don't respect the ruling of the world.
Now, this comes amid reports that these hostage and ceasefire negotiations may in fact begin once again this coming week, although the Israeli Prime Minister is vowing to push on with this war. He's also slamming claims that he is blocking these talks, saying that this is lies, adding instead of putting pressure on Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, it's put on the Israeli government. Certainly a lot of hope here on the ground for the families of these more than 120 Israeli hostages that do remain in the Gaza Strip. They have been there now for more than 230 days. While there's a lot of hope that these talks may once again resume, there's really not a lot of optimism. In Tel Aviv, Sarah Coates reporting for CBC News.
At least 20 people, including 4 children, are dead after a series of powerful storms struck the southern U.S. on the weekend. And forecasters say the severe weather could shift to the East Coast. Steve Futterman reports.
This was supposed to be an extended holiday weekend here in the U.S., but for many Americans, it's been anything but a celebration. Extreme weather, tornadoes, hail, wind, and rain have hit a number of states. Among the states hardest hit, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Kentucky. In some places, the damage is overwhelming. Numerous homes destroyed. The foundations remain, but not much else. Trees have been toppled, also streetlights and power lines. Hundreds of thousands are without electricity. There have also been harrowing stories of survivals, people describing how they hid in a basement or shelter as the rest of their home was blown away. Today, residents and elected officials were assessing the damage.
I knew I'd have at least a couple of trees down, but I didn't realize that all my trees would be down.
Sadly, we can confirm that we have lost at least 4 Kentuckians from last night's storm.
This weather system has now moved east, so other states could face similar problems. Extreme weather watches are in effect up and down the East Coast, from New York to Washington, all the way down to Savannah, Georgia. Steve Futterman for CBC News, Los Angeles.
In Vancouver, commercial real estate owners are being told to cut their emissions or face hefty fines. As Tanya Fletcher explains, the new city bylaw is the first of its kind in Canada.
Here in Vancouver, more than half of all carbon pollution vents from buildings. And so the city wants to cut down on emissions coming from big retail and commercial office spaces. So that's why it's brought in this new bylaw, a first in the country, that will cap emissions on roughly 200 buildings citywide. About a dozen of those are owned by Cadillac Fairview. The company says it's currently in the process of upgrading 2 of its buildings to comply with the new regulations, including its downtown mall.
It can take a while for the design to happen, for the equipment procurement to happen, for the installation to happen on site. It's not something that you could rush. So we wanted to make sure that we were well ahead of the curve and not rushing at the last minute to try and make things happen.
Vancouver's bylaw was inspired by similar measures in New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. Schneider Electric is a global company that helps building owners with decarbonization. They look at the energy footprint of a building to calculate what retrofits are needed.
The technologies exist, the business models exist, the financing exists to get probably 70% of a good transition done relatively quickly. With the right structures, we see lots of progress being made in 3-year timeframes.
The city says right now about 1 in 4 buildings covered by the new bylaw currently exceed the emissions limits, with fines typically ranging from $10,000 to $30,000. But those building owners have a grace period until 2026 before those penalties kick in. BC's Industry Association says while the timelines are feasible, it's the cost that can be a big challenge.
Especially if you're looking at a building where maybe you've just recently in the past few years upgraded some of your building equipment, and now you're having to look at replacing that equipment that you just installed in order to comply with the building bylaws.
Ultimately, Vancouver's goal is to cut big building emissions in half by 2030 and altogether by 2040. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
The city is partnering with the provincial and federal governments in a pilot technology project aimed at improving transportation in Toronto.
We are eager to see this technology in action, to see how it can help us solve the problems like blocking the box, because that holds up traffic and makes our road less safe for everyone.
The OVIN Technology Pilot Zone project will test different technology solutions in tackling transportation challenges in the city. The pilot project will see the testing of new traffic cameras and sensor technologies that use artificial intelligence and 5G. Following the pilots, the city can choose to implement any technology that was successful in improving congestion and safety on the roads. An emotional and somber memorial in Newfoundland over the weekend. The remains of an unknown Newfoundland soldier were returned home from France. The soldier was a member of the Newfoundland Regiment. He died in the First World War more than 100 years ago, before Newfoundland became a province. The casket arrived Saturday following a ceremony earlier in the day at the Beaumont-Hamel Newfoundland Memorial in France. A procession took the casket past several historical sites connected to the Newfoundland Regiment. Shareholders of Indigo have approved a deal to privatize the bookseller. The offer of $2.50 per share comes from two companies owned by Gerald Schwartz, the husband of Indigo CEO Heather Reisman, and they have a 56% stake in Indigo, which is Canada's largest book retailer. The Ontario Superior Court of Justice approved the deal, as did a special committee of independent directors formed to assess the transaction. The Indigo expects the deal to close next month, with shares to be delisted soon after. Indigo is trying to bring profitability and growth back to the company. The retailer, which was founded in 1996, has been struggling recently. It suffered a cyber attack last year, a series of quarterly losses leading up to the January layoffs, and the departure of 10 board members. And as we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. The TSX rose 53 points. The Dow was closed for the Memorial Day holiday in the U.S., and the dollar traded up at 73.34 cents U.S. We'll be right back with another look at our top stories. On your mark, get set, go. The Toronto District School Board launched their annual barrier-free track and field meet today. Over the course of 4 days, 1,600 students from over 100 schools will be participating in a variety of sports and activities. Here are some of the sights and sounds from day one.
We focus on sometimes what these students can't do, and this is an opportunity to say, hey, you know what, let's give it a go. Let's celebrate what you can do. We call it track and field, but there's also the National Ballet of Canada's here. We got First Tee Golf here. We got our obstacles, we got our dashes, wheelchair basketball, roller sledge. The goal here is to provide these students opportunities that they might not otherwise be given. Let's get them out here. Let's see all the cool, awesome things that they can do. Let's celebrate their abilities and give them opportunities that they are usually not given. I want to see these students be inspired by some of these new activities that they're going to be exposed to. I have had students come back to me that have gone on to Paralympic sports and represented Canada internationally, and that's been really cool, being able to inspire them. But it's really, let's just get every single student in here and let's just give everybody the equal opportunities that they deserve. Let's see what you can do and celebrate that.
Just loving all those smiles.
Yeah.
And we have something to smile about after we get through this little bit of rain.
Yeah, you know, we were coming off a pretty nice weather pattern. We've got a couple of days a little wetter, obviously today being one of those, and then we're going to flip the switch again and move in the other direction. Our current temperatures, they are looking like this. Some of the sunshine from this afternoon helped pop our temperatures up into the low 20s. Toronto, Mississauga, Hamilton, and St. Catharines 24, and Oshawa even in the low 20s there at 22. But a tiny bit of humidity, you might be feeling it, and that's why if you were caught in the rain, I mean, it was a fairly warm rain. It had a warm feel to it, right? Even if the temperatures weren't way up in the upper 20s. In terms of additional amounts, another 5 to say 10 millimeters between the wraparound from the system moving through and the next one that still has to pop through and go. That'll be passing us by kind of tomorrow till about midnight, tomorrow evening, and then that real change comes in the pattern. And this is the additional, but we've already seen over 30 millimeters in many cases around the GTA. I was showing you that cell from earlier that had kind of passed through Newmarket area. We'll go in for a closer look and see what's left of it. Still some lightning strikes in there, but it is sort of breaking apart, and see now smaller cells, not one large one, through here headed towards Peterborough, the Kawartha Lakes. Then we've also had the risk of that active weather in terms of potential for tornadic activity. That's what a watch means, kind of the ingredients there. That's still holding into extreme parts of eastern Ontario, and then some actual active weather in terms of the area in red across the border into Quebec, a severe thunderstorm warning, and the expanded area severe thunderstorm watch. So there have been some stronger storms certainly in that region, winding down though for the risk in Ontario. So we take you through the evening. Still some of these scattered showers have to make their way and rotate on through. So wet weather here and there. Then we see that tomorrow, probably hard to get some sunny breaks, more so into southwestern Ontario. And then we do, and it just adds to the instability and more showers. But by the time we're getting into Wednesday, this next batch is being pushed southward by a ridge of high pressure that's building in. And that's what's going to give us the nice weather as we move through midweek to the end of the week and on into the weekend. Yes, it's going to be a pattern that's going to hang in there for several days. So after lows tonight, 14 to around 16 degrees. Tomorrow's daytime high up to 19 with some of that wet weather. Shouldn't be too much to it, as you saw. Wednesday, 19, kind of variable skies. There'll be a little more cloud cover perhaps earlier in the day, and then we'll see that clearing out. And once that does clear out, not only do we get more sunshine coming on through, but look what that's going to do to help that temperature start to climb back into the 20s as well.
Nothing to complain about with those temperatures. Thanks so much, Colette.
You're welcome.
And that is our show for you tonight. Thanks for joining us. There is no newscast at 11 tonight because of hockey playoffs. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 6. Have a great night, everyone.